They didn't say it outright. No one ever does in families like his. But the message was clear the moment I stepped out of my car. It wasn't just any car, it was mine. Old, reliable, paid off with sweat and strategy. But to them, it was an eyesore. Harper, my sister-in-law, smirked as I parked near the circular drive. "You sure you want to leave that here?" she said, voice dipped in sugar and venom. I smiled, said nothing, just locked it with a key she didn't recognize. Yet. See, people like her don't notice value unless it's wrapped in logos and leather. But the best weapons are always quiet. And I wasn't here to argue. I was here to end a game they didn't know had already started. I used to believe that love could transcend class. That two people, no matter how different their backgrounds, could build a bridge if the foundation was honest. That illusion lasted exactly 1 week into my marriage to David Whitmore. The Whitmores didn't scream. They didn't slam doors or call names. Their brand of cruelty came dressed in cashmere, smiled with porcelain teeth, and cut you slowly, methodically, like a surgeon removing something they found distasteful. Harper, David's older sister, was the first to draw blood. It started with the car. My car, a vintage Toyota that I'd restored myself over 2 years, practical, reliable, and, to someone with an eye, rare. But Harper didn't see value. She saw offense. "That's what you drive?" she asked, eyebrows arched high enough to scrape the sky. I laughed it off, made a joke, something about preferring horsepower over horsepower branding. She didn't laugh. David, standing next to me, didn't laugh either. He said nothing. That silence would become its own language. The Whitmore estate was massive, a 15-bedroom Georgian-style mansion on the Hudson, complete with tennis courts, a wine cellar larger than my entire first apartment, and a staff that moved like ghosts. I tried to make myself useful, offered to help in the kitchen, learned the names of the gardeners, complimented the housekeeper's scarf. I'd grown up in a working-class household. You show appreciation to people. You treat everyone with dignity. That was my first mistake. "Sweet of you to speak with the staff," David's mother, Evelyn, said one morning over breakfast, her voice a velvet blade. "We try to keep some professional distance. Makes everyone more comfortable." By everyone, she meant them. At family dinners, I was asked questions like, "What made you decide to teach, Hannah? It's such modest work." Or, "Do you and David plan to travel, or will your schedule get in the way?" Each word measured, each glance exchanged between them like secret handshakes. I answered with grace, smiled, poured more wine. But each day, a layer peeled away from the fantasy I'd once believed in. One afternoon, I pulled into the estate just as Harper was coming out for a run. She eyed the Toyota like it had insulted her ancestors. "You know," she said, tightening the strap on her Apple Watch, "Mom's thinking of redoing the front landscaping. Maybe keep the driveway clean, minimal, streamlined. Cars like that kind of disrupt the aesthetic." I blinked. "It's my car, Harper." She smiled. "Exactly." When I told David later that night, he shrugged. "She's just particular. You know how Harper is." "No," I said. "I know how Harper chooses to be." He didn't reply. Later that week, I passed by the parlor as Harper and Evelyn sipped tea with a woman I didn't recognize. They didn't see me, or maybe they did and didn't care. "I give it a year," Harper was saying. "She's nice, but let's be honest. David married down. She probably sees him as a ticket." Evelyn didn't argue. She just stirred her tea and said, "Some people are clever like that." That was when the illusion shattered. I didn't say anything that night. I smiled through dinner, laughed when David made some tired joke about real estate market trends, and poured another glass of wine. But inside, I was already withdrawing. Not from David, but from the fantasy I had bought into. A week later, while using David's iPad to email myself a document, a message popped up on the corner of the screen. It was from a group chat titled Core Whitmores. Curious, I tapped. It was them, Harper, Evelyn, even David occasionally. Dozens of messages, photos of me, One with the caption, "She wore this to brunch. I can't." Another, "Let's make sure she doesn't get involved with the foundation account." Then, "David, get her to sign the prenup addendum. Play it cool." My fingers went numb. I locked the screen, walked to the guest bathroom, threw up. When I emerged, David was waiting in the hallway. "You okay?" I smiled. "Headache." He kissed my forehead. "You're strong," he said. I smiled wider. And that night, while he slept beside me, I got up, pulled my laptop from my bag, and began setting up access to every financial portal connected to the Whitmore family assets. Passwords, foundation reports, investment portfolios, all quietly linked to my name the day I married him. They thought I'd married up. They had no idea what I really brought into this family, and I wasn't just going to show them. I was going to make sure they never forgot. I played my part well. The obedient wife, the agreeable outsider, the harmless professor. I let my voice soften, let my steps fall quieter. I asked Evelyn for advice on flower arrangements. I let Harper ramble about Pilates and courtside Knicks tickets like I didn't own more equity in Silicon Valley than her entire trust fund. It didn't take long for them to drop their guard. At dinner, Harper leaned over and whispered, "You're settling in well. I was worried you'd be too academic for our world." I smiled. She took it as submission. Evelyn invited me to join her charity committee, mostly to watch and learn. I nodded eagerly. They saw a grateful outsider clawing her way in. What they didn't realize was I'd already mapped every inch of the room, and I was quietly changing the locks. Each night after David fell asleep, I combed through emails, scanned financial attachments, and cross-referenced foundation donations. I wasn't just looking. I was archiving, indexing, tagging. For every brunch I endured, I had 2 hours of forensic accounting logged. One email thread caught my eye: foundation wire transfers from Whitmore Trust to non-profit organizations in the Caribbean. The names were vague, the recipients untraceable, but one document slipped through unfiltered: an Excel sheet, accidentally attached, listing redistribution margins and cleansing protocols. Evelyn's name was on the footer. I didn't react, didn't confront. Instead, I kept digging. Her Whitmore Women's Fund accepted 7-figure donations, then rerouted them through a series of mentorship workshops in offshore zones. Clean, polished, impossible to pin down unless you knew where to look. And I did. Meanwhile, Harper kept performing. One morning, as I handed her a coffee, she glanced at my keys. "Still driving that thing?" she said, gesturing to the Toyota. "You know, I could help you lease something respectable." I smiled. "That'd be so generous." She laughed, satisfied. What she didn't know was that the Toyota was a cover, a carefully chosen shell around a limited edition retro mod vehicle. Under the hood, a 4.0-liter engine, carbon ceramic brakes, and a custom plaque from a global motorsport company. There were only 50 in the world. Mine was number 13, but branding wasn't always about showing off. Sometimes it was about staying invisible. The more they underestimated me, the better. I noticed Harper's spending grow bolder. Her shopping sprees extended into Europe. One week, she bragged about a boutique in Paris refusing to sell a handbag to anyone but her. The next, she posted photos from the Amalfi Coast. But she'd forgotten something, or never thought to check it in the first place. A year ago, after our engagement, I gave David a supplementary credit card linked to one of my side accounts. I used it for convenience, a shared Uber here, a brunch there. But when I cross-referenced the recent charges, the digits matched. Harper had been using my card, $12,300 in Italy, $4,800 at a spa in Monaco, $1,600 at a jewelry boutique in Zurich. She'd charged them all to me. I printed the statements. I didn't tell David. He wouldn't have believed me anyway. He'd have shrugged, said, maybe she thought it was hers. Maybe he still thought all money was his, by default. One night, as we lay in bed, he asked, "Are you happy?" I turned to him. Why wouldn't I be? He kissed my forehead. Just want to make sure you feel safe here. I smiled, kept my hand on his chest. Safe? No. Strategic? Always. The next morning, I dressed in my usual cardigan and flats, poured coffee, kissed his cheek, told him I'd be visiting an old friend for lunch. Instead, I drove to my attorney. There, I transferred $200,000 from my personal holdings into David's account. Not anonymously. I wanted a record. Then I signed a temporary withdrawal of joint holdings, allowed under the prenuptial clause he'd never bothered to read carefully. By sunset, my car was gone from the Whitmore estate. My phone disconnected. My email scrubbed. I left no note, just one transaction receipt, to the family that thought I was weak, naive, and grateful. I left a message in numbers. You never saw me coming. Disappearing wasn't the end of the story. It was just my intermission. The Whitmores were used to silence meaning surrender. They thought I'd walked away because I couldn't handle their world. What they didn't know was that I'd simply stepped into a different phase of the game, one I'd been designing since the moment I realized David wasn't mine. Not really. A week after I left, I hired a private investigator. I gave her two names, Harper Whitmore and David Whitmore. I didn't need rumors. I needed facts, documents, evidence. She delivered. David had been emailing with someone under the initials KM for over a year. A quick check of the email domain, private, encrypted, led to a burner IP linked to a penthouse apartment in Soho. I didn't recognize the initials at first, but the photo surveillance made it clear. KM was Krista Morgan, my college roommate, maid of honor at our wedding, the one who said she couldn't make it last minute due to a family emergency. I remembered now. David had insisted she be on the guest list. I didn't cry. I'd already stopped expecting fidelity. I just filed it all away. The second file was Harper. Turns out, before her current glow-up as a corporate lawyer, Harper had been quietly sued for embezzlement from a nonprofit she worked with. The case had been sealed, privately settled with help from Evelyn, who used the family foundation to pay off the complainants. Cleaned and buried, but not deleted. I now had copies of those court documents. With every piece of evidence, I layered my strategy. I couldn't fight them head on. That would have made me just another angry ex-wife. No, I had to use the one thing they couldn't resist: control. David missed me, publicly at least. He left voicemails, emails, had my old friends reach out, said he was worried, that he just wanted to talk. I let the silence grow, let him wonder. Then I sent him a financial tip. Just one. A real estate lead that looked like gold. Land in upstate New York listed as undervalued, ripe for development. I crafted the documents myself through a shell company I owned under a different name. The trust structure was elegant, legal, discreet. David bit. He wanted to impress his family, especially Evelyn, who had begun to doubt his leadership after my departure. So he acted fast, transferred money, signed contracts. What he didn't realize was that the ownership of that land and the LLC tied to it would revert to a default beneficiary if he failed to disclose the origin of the funds. The default beneficiary? Me. In the following weeks, I repeated the pattern. Advisory roles, tax loophole tips, all funneled through my firm, all presented as external guidance. Each contract buried a clause, an ownership pivot, a conversion clause, a delayed title transfer. By the end of the quarter, David had unknowingly transferred 47% of the Whitmore portfolio to a web of entities I controlled. The final piece came on a Sunday afternoon. I sent an email, anonymous, encrypted, to Evelyn's accountant. Included within, flagged wire transfers, falsified nonprofit expenses, and Harper's settlement documents. The accountant did what all accountants do when they smell risk. He reported it. The IRS moved quickly. The foundation's assets were frozen, Evelyn's accounts locked, Harper's credentials flagged for review by the state bar. David, Well, David was summoned to the boardroom of Whitmore Holdings. By the end of that meeting, he was out. I watched it unfold from my laptop, sipping tea from the quiet of a Brooklyn brownstone under my name alone. And when the media storm broke, I made one call. To a journalist I trusted. I didn't speak as Hannah Whitmore. I spoke as H.M. Langston, economist, investor, and anonymous whistleblower. The headline read, "Insider Leaks Explosive Corruption from Within Elite Real Estate Dynasty." The story went viral within 24 hours. I included quotes, dates, even audio clips. "They called me harmless," I wrote. "I was just underestimated." By the week's end, Harper's face was on every tabloid. Evelyn was under review for nonprofit fraud. David vanished from the company site. And then came the email. No subject, just text. "I didn't know, I swear. Come back, please. We can fix this together." I stared at the screen, not because I was tempted, but because it was pathetic. He still thought this was about saving us. He still didn't understand. This was never about revenge. It was about rewriting the ending. And I wasn't finished yet. The studio lights were blinding, but I didn't flinch. My palms rested loosely in my lap, my posture relaxed, the way it always was when I knew I controlled the narrative. Across from me, the talk show host smiled, the practiced kind, equal parts charm and calculation. "We're here with economist and investor Hannah Langston," she said, voice silk, whose recent anonymous disclosures led to one of the biggest white-collar investigations in the city's history. "Hannah, thank you for joining us." I nodded. "Thank you for having me." "You were silent for so long. Why speak now?" I looked into the camera, not at her, not at the audience, at the women watching from behind closed doors with clenched teeth and open wounds, because silence was their currency, I said, and I decided it was time to bankrupt them. That clip alone got over 2 million views in 48 hours. I never used names, never described David, Evelyn, or Harper. I didn't need to. The facts were public. My words were strategic. I didn't accuse. I explained. I talked about power, about the illusion of equality in marriage, about how financial abuse could be dressed in designer suits and family dinners. I told them how easy it was to be erased from your own life if you weren't watching the contracts, if you trusted too much. They thought I needed them, I said. I just gave them a chance to prove they didn't deserve me. That line went viral. It ended up on T-shirts, mugs, Reddit threads. Women across the country stitched it into their Instagram bios. It wasn't just a quote, it was a mirror. When the interview ended, the producers handed me a sleek, black envelope. Inside, a red pass, TEDx, an invitation to speak. The theme was reclamation. Of course it was. Later that night, I stood by the window of the brownstone watching the city pulse below me. I hadn't responded to David's email. I never would, but I didn't delete it. I kept it, a souvenir, a timestamp. The next phase needed a new name. I called it Phoenix Protocol because I hadn't just survived. I had rebuilt in flames. I contacted my lawyer and outlined the first draft of what would become the Lexus Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal, financial, and emotional support to women navigating high-stakes divorces, especially those manipulated by wealth and power. The name came from my grandmother, Lexus Langston, a seamstress, a woman who stitched independence into every hem. She died with $2,300 in the bank and a will that left every cent to her 3 daughters. "So you never have to beg a man to keep the lights on," she once told my mother. Lexus Foundation launched quietly. No press. Just an open website and a team of pro bono lawyers I'd been vetting for months. Within days, applications flooded in. Women from every coast, every story different, every injustice familiar. Meanwhile, the Whitmores unraveled in public. Evelyn's accounts were seized under a court-ordered audit. Her name stripped from the board of 3 nonprofits. Harper's bar license was suspended pending investigation. The settlement she'd buried a decade ago came roaring back with interest and subpoena. David, tried to pivot. He held a press conference, insisted he'd been unaware, claimed he'd been manipulated. It didn't work. Investors pulled out, shareholders revolted. By the end of the month, Whitmore Holdings was on the verge of a hostile takeover. I didn't celebrate, not publicly. But when I walked into the Lexus office and saw the team drafting contracts for a single mother in Florida fighting for custody, or a retiree in Texas trying to reclaim her pension, I felt something deeper than victory. I felt alignment. My phone buzzed late that Friday, a message from a contact at the governor's office. "You might want to be at City Hall Monday morning. Dress nice." I didn't ask questions, just showed up. The room was modest, no cameras, no stage, just a quiet ceremony for civic recognition, community impact, legal innovation. They called my name. I walked up, accepted a certificate in a plain frame. Nothing fancy, but I saw Harper's last Instagram post days earlier, captioned, "Taking a break from social." The timing was poetic. I smiled for the official photo. Later that night, I sat on the brownstone's rooftop, a glass of wine in hand, legs curled under me. The skyline stretched wide, unconcerned. Somewhere, Evelyn was facing federal charges. Harper was probably rewriting her LinkedIn bio. David, I didn't know, didn't care. But in my inbox, a new email blinked, not from them, from a woman in Detroit. Subject line, "You saved me. How can I help save someone else?" And I knew. This was never about revenge. It was about replication. Lighting one fire wasn't enough. I needed to build a system that couldn't be put out. Power is a spotlight, and the longer you stand in it, the lonelier it feels. After the ceremony at City Hall, congratulations flooded in. Emails, messages, mentions. Everyone wanted to quote me, tag me, interview me. But not call, not meet, not sit across a table and laugh over wine. Somewhere along the way, the friends I once had stopped reaching out. Not because they disliked me, because they didn't know how to speak to me anymore. They saw the press version of me, the woman who brought down a dynasty, the calculating strategist, the cold-blooded reformer, and I let them. It was easier. The Lexus Foundation continued growing, case after case, woman after woman. But I stopped celebrating the wins. Every victory came with a spreadsheet. Every solved case exposed another 1,000 miles away. One morning, my assistant dropped a small package on my desk, a USB drive. No sender, just a handwritten note. "He wanted you to see this." I plugged it into my laptop, a video file. I clicked play. David sat in what looked like a hotel room. His hair was longer, beard unkempt, suit wrinkled. He looked older, softer. "I know I don't deserve your time," he began, "but I wanted you to know. I didn't know what they were doing. I should have. Maybe I chose not to see. You were always the smarter one." He looked down, inhaled slowly. "They call you cold now. Ruthless. I don't think you are. I think you're just done letting people walk over you. I get it now, and I'm sorry I was one of them." He ended with a whisper. "I hope you find peace, Hannah." I closed the laptop. That same week, headlines began shifting. She built a fortune on divorce, but at what cost? From victim to ice queen, the rise and chill of Hannah Langston. Journalists started asking if I was exploiting pain, if I was profiting off the broken. A reporter referred to me as the Iron Widow in a profile. Another quoted an anonymous source calling me vindictive, self-righteous. I didn't respond, but I felt it. The walls closing in, the shift from heroine to cautionary tale. And one night, as I sat in my office staring at a wall of testimonials, smiling faces, grateful words, I asked myself something I hadn't dared before. Was it worth it? The silence didn't answer. It never does. The next morning, my legal director stormed into my office, breathless. "We have a breach." I blinked. Data? Worse. Leaks. Someone's been feeding intel to opposing firms, our strategy docs, client timelines, settlement figures. My pulse thudded. Who? We're tracing it now, but we think it's internal. Someone close. It didn't take long. By noon, we had the evidence. Erin, my assistant, the one who'd been with me since the beginning, the one who brought the USB. I reviewed the logs, the email trails. She'd been sending attachments to a rival firm, Lexmore Legal, a private equity-backed entity that had been circling us for months. I'd even shaken hands with their founder last year. He called me the future. Apparently, he meant his future. Erin sold them our framework for a fraction of its worth. My legal team scrambled to freeze accounts, terminate access, and begin litigation, but the damage was done. Lexmore pounced. They used our model, our exact language, to pitch wealthy investors, pushed into 3 of our pending cases, offered our clients higher settlements to switch counsel. Some took the bait. By week's end, we'd lost our biggest case, a high-profile divorce involving a Fortune 100 executive. Estimated damages, $12.4 million gone. My team rallied. They worked harder, longer, faster. But I saw the fear in their eyes, the instability, the cracks, and I saw myself, staring at a war I thought I'd already won. The next night, I stayed late. Everyone had left. The lights buzzed overhead. My office felt cavernous, soulless. I walked to the wall of framed success stories, photos of women holding court documents, hugging their children, stepping into new homes. I took them down, one by one. Then I sat behind my desk, alone, no music, no emails, just my breath, echoing in the emptiness, and I stared at the city beyond the glass. It didn't look like salvation anymore, just lights, and far too many shadows. The first thing I did was delete it all. Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, my website. Every trace of the digital identity I'd curated so carefully wiped clean. Not archived, deleted. There was a difference. Archiving implies nostalgia. Deletion means rebirth. The silence was jarring. For the first time in years, my phone stopped vibrating. No push notifications, no news alerts, no curated feeds, whispering what I should care about. I packed 2 suitcases and left the brownstone. The city didn't even blink. In a town 3 hours north, I rented a cabin, the kind with chipped paint and uneven floors. No concierge, no security gate. Just a key left under a rock and a note from the landlord that said, "Don't worry about the raccoons, they're chill." For the first week, I slept. For the second, I read. By the third, I had signed up for night classes at a local law school under a pseudonym. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I wasn't networking. I sat in the back, took notes, raised my hand only when I had to. I wanted to understand how to protect what I'd built, and how to do it without lawyers, headlines, or public sympathy. I was no longer fighting for power. I was learning how to guard peace. During the day, I started teaching again, quietly. Free weekend workshops at the town library. Financial Literacy for Women was the flyer title. No mention of who I was, no photo, just dates, times, and a promise. No judgment, just knowledge. The first session, 6 people showed up. By the 3rd month, there were 30. By the 6th, over 100. Women drove from hours away. Some brought their daughters. Some brought divorce papers. Most brought shame they'd been told was theirs to carry. I gave them numbers instead, percentages, options, tools. They gave me purpose. The library grew too small. We moved to a community center, then a local college auditorium. One morning, as I arrived, a security guard stopped me outside. "You might want to look down the block," he said. I turned and saw them. A line that stretched around the corner. Women of every age, every walk of life, waiting. Some in heels, some in sneakers, some with babies in their arms, all quiet, all present. When I walked past, they stepped aside. They didn't cheer. They bowed their heads. Gratitude. I felt it like a wave, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like peace. Later that night, I stood by the classroom door packing up notes when a teenage girl approached me. She was maybe 17, wearing an oversized hoodie, holding a folder too tightly. She didn't speak right away. Then softly, "You saved my mom." I looked at her. "She used to cry every night," the girl continued. "Now she teaches me how to budget. We're moving into our own place next month. She said to tell you thank you." I wanted to say something wise, something profound, but all I managed was a quiet, "I'm proud of her." The girl smiled. "I want to do what you do. Someday." I nodded. "You will." She walked away. I stood alone in the hallway, the lights flickering above me, and I realized this was what all the fire had been for, not to burn down a house, but to light a path. Months passed. I stayed. The town knew me only as Ms. Langston, the woman who taught free classes, grew tomatoes behind her cottage, and never missed a Monday morning walk by the river. I'd stopped checking the news. I no longer cared about Harper, Evelyn, or David. They belonged to a world I no longer recognized. One afternoon, I finished class and headed to the parking lot. My car sat under a tree, dust-covered but sturdy. I pulled the key from my coat. No more designer logos, no rare emblems, just a plain black key, and it worked just fine. As I opened the door, I glanced in the mirror, not to fix my hair, just to look. The woman staring back wasn't polished or famous or feared. She was free, and for the first time in forever, that was enough.